As a filmmaker, if there's one film that I would most like to write or direct a sequel to, it's John Carpenter's The Thing. Not just because it's a great film in almost every respect, but more so because the film leaves so much to the audience's imagination. So before I start putting forth my thoughts and concept sketches for a sequel, let's recap some details from the 1982 version and the 2011 prequel. In the 1982 version of The Thing, we're not shown or told outright which characters are assimilated at what point, though many clues are offered. For example, after Childs burns the creature in the dog kennel, the first characters to rush in and put out the fire, thus ensuring most of the alien tissue mass survives, are Norris and Palmer. Both of these characters turn out to be imitations. The physical and psychological nature of the alien creature, which assimilates and imitates other life forms, raises many unanswered questions. Do assimilated characters know that they are not human? Is assimilation a quick death for the victim or slow agony? Do imitations within the team know who else is an imitation? And if so, do these imposters scheme together or act in their own interests? There are details that hint at various possibilities. Palmer Thing looks nervous before the blood test that exposes him. Norris Thing reveals itself without coercion, possibly to seize an opportunity to kill one of its key enemies, a doctor, and knowing that it will quickly be burned by MacReady. The tactic implies a sense of self-sacrifice, like trading pieces in a chess game. We don't find out explicitly how Fuchs died, or how the alien accessed the locked blood storage. But most of all, there's the apocalyptic implications should the Thing manage to reach Earth's more hospitable regions. Those possibilities are almost too horrific to fully comprehend. These mystery aspects of Carpenter's film give real scope for a worthwhile sequel, and the huge fan base of the film know this. But rather than expand upon those themes and ideas, what we instead got in The Thing 2011 prequel was, ironically, a cinematic imitation of the first film, right down to the title of the film. Telling the story of the Norwegian camp was a safe bet, a convenient way to rehash the first film without calling it a remake. After a generic first 30 minutes, there was a good 40-odd minutes of paranoid group interactions and horrific assimilations. This section of the film was fairly creepy, even though it was simply a rehashing of Carpenter's film. But then we got the silly alien spaceship ending. In tired Hollywood formula style, the main character is allowed to live, which sort of negates the doom and gloom implications of the Norwegian camp ruins in the 1982 film. But Thing 2011 also failed to deliver on other levels. There were two interesting ideas regarding the absence of tooth fillings and jewellery as indicators of who is human, yet the all-important factor of clothing was almost completely ignored. In the first film it was made very clear that the creature tears through clothing when it assimilates its prey, which also implies a ferocious level of violence. For example, after Blair is seen doing his research on a potential global infection, he curiously locks himself in his office, which may have been because he was in the process of being assimilated.
There's something wrong with Blair. He's locked himself in his room and he won't answer the door.
He then smashes the radio room up, but his shirt is gone. Is he a human or imitation at this point? He's then locked in the tool shed and shows up minus his beige coat near the end. A coat of that same colour is then worn by Childs in the final scene, strongly suggesting he's infected, but in all other scenes Childs' coat is navy blue. Continuity of clothing is a major factor.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know if it was really me?
In fact, I posted a 17-minute video on that subject, which you can watch on my RobAg88 channel. But in Thing 2011, assimilated characters show up wearing the same clothes they had on before they were assimilated. The worst example is that, according to the jewellery continuity of the film, this guy is human just prior to entering the spaceship. He and the woman are separated in the ship, and by the time they come out he is an imitation, but his clothing is neither torn nor bloody. That doesn't work, and if he is an imitation, then why not just attack her right away? He's the one with the flamethrower, and he has her alone. The ending doesn't work. The notion that the alien can't assimilate dead tissue is logical. This was something the Thing 2011 writers paid some attention to, and it could have been expanded to include all sorts of other factors like tattoos, hair dye, and perhaps scar tissue. However, the inorganic material dilemma also means that the alien shouldn't be able to imitate a human at all, because our outer skin is mostly dead cells, as is much of our hair and our fingernails. This is a logical stumbling block that a Thing's sequel needs to address. I'll put forward my ideas on that topic shortly. But for now I just want to mention a few other things about the Thing prequel, not to try and negate the film, but to glean a few lessons that would make a sequel better. The old, nervous person possibly walking to their death who was then scared by something harmless device is used a couple of times.
Jesus!
We've seen this cliche hundreds of times, with some modern filmmakers using it repeatedly in a single film. It's so overused that it now acts more as an indicator of unoriginality and should be generally avoided by serious filmmakers. Having the main character throw an explosive into the alien's mouth was also an old cliche. We've seen this done in movies like Starship Troopers and Leviathan. And slow motion doesn't seem to work for a movie like this either. There was no slow motion at all in the 1982 version. Thing 2011 also has a lack of attention to realistic temperature issues. The creature manages to thaw and burst out of a block of ice, even though the surrounding ice hasn't melted at all. It then proceeds to assimilate someone in the freezing outdoors, even though we saw in the first film that it freezes when it's outdoors. The assimilation process also seems to be too fast compared to the dog imitation scene from the 1982 film. Slow assimilation makes the alien more menacing and biologically plausible. And although I quite like the double-headed creature effect, it mismatched the first film. This isn't two heads. It's one head splitting into two distinct half faces, hinting at the film's identity themes. Overall, I appreciated the reasonably competent directing effort of Thing 2011, but Carpenter's version didn't have all these kinds of logical inconsistencies. It also left the biological mechanism of the creature open to question, rather than present a flawed logic. One aspect that I thought worked surprisingly well in some scenes of the 2011 version was the use of CGI. It works well here and here. But this huge beast in the alien ship didn't work at all for me. The dark and light contrast was too diluted, so it just looked like something that had been green screened into the shot. Another coloration issue is that a lot of the monsters were very pink, as opposed to the dark blood reds used in the 1982 film. For some reason that just makes it seem less gory and less scary. But having said that, the weakest moment for me in the 1982 film was that we get two awesome shots of the spider head, only to then see it straddle along like it's being pulled on a trolley. CGI could have sorted that out. For example, this monster simply couldn't be done with traditional special effects. You need CGI to do this. Another key difference is that in Carpenter's film the alien comes off as very intelligent and manipulative, planting false evidence to incriminate MacReady, choosing the least noticeable characters to assimilate, sabotaging the blood, making doctors and scientists its key enemies, and refusing to let itself be locked in a kennel or a store cupboard. But I generally didn't get that sense of cunning in the prequel, apart from the scene where the main character is cornered by this woman thing.
Where are they? In that drawer. You said there were 5?
I also felt that the Thing prequel would always be hampered by the fact that it was set in a non-English speaking camp. So, as was expected, a bunch of American English speaking characters were thrown in to justify having everyone speak in English. And the only character who can't speak English just happens to be the one who chases the dog thing and gets killed at the beginning of Carpenter's film. I was hoping the film would instead have many characters who couldn't speak English, thus making the group dependent on some people being translators. Throw an imitation translator character into the mix and you've got a great recipe for mind games and paranoia. It worked well enough in this scene. I was also hoping that perhaps divisions of group loyalty by nationality would be played upon to greater effect, but we didn't get much of that either. So, with all these thoughts about The Thing 1982 and 2011, my instinct is to make a sequel that fits with the logic of Carpenter's film rather than the prequel. To try and be faithful to both films wouldn't work because the two films already mismatch each other in a way that isn't worth trying to reconcile. Now, one idea I've had in mind for years regarding a Thing sequel is the notion of sexual fear. In Carpenter's film, all the characters were men, so sexuality wasn't a factor. However, there is a thematically interesting poster in the rec room that says, "They're not labelled, chum." Probably a joke reference to the identities of people in the room and the labelled blood sample dishes. And beneath the woman in the poster we see the phrase, "I have VD." Of course that ties in with the disease fears the film plays on. In fact, the rec room has several props of thematic interest. There's an asteroids video game machine in which a player tries to avoid contact with asteroids by shooting and dodging them, but when he does shoot them they break into smaller asteroids that also must be avoided. The Thing does that itself in this scene. And when Mac's flamethrower malfunctions we see a poster that says, "Heatwave." But let's get back to the subject of sexuality. In the prequel there were male and female characters. Considering that the alien needs a period of isolation with the target subject for successful assimilation, and most likely would prefer them to be naked so that it doesn't have to tear their clothes apart, sexual encounters would be an ideal attack strategy. This scene in the prequel might have been an intentional metaphor of a sexual attack, and as some people have amusingly pointed out, the creature often takes on the appearance of being a vagina with teeth. I doubt those were intentional metaphors, but even if they were, a lot more could have been done with it. A seductive sex scene that turns into a horrific and violent assimilation is certainly something that I would include in a Thing sequel. Now the obvious plot direction to take the sequel in is to have a rescue team find the remains of the base and somehow bring the alien infection back to America, where it can cause havoc as it tries to take over the whole world. But such a story would be so grandiose in scale that it would be a stark mismatch with the creeping paranoia and confinement that is the hallmark of Carpenter's film. I don't think it would work, especially being that it would be near enough impossible to prevent the infection spreading across the globe. Once the Thing reaches civilization, it's effectively won. At the same time, confining a sequel to Antarctica would seem like a complete cop-out and another imitation of the first film. No, a worthwhile Thing sequel needs to take on the apocalyptic story of the Thing taking over Earth and how humans respond to that dilemma. And it needs to somehow tell that story in a confined location with a limited number of people. So here's the basic scenario I've devised for a sequel called The Thing Inside. In the event of a spreading mass infection emergency, political and economic leaders would most likely retreat to some sort of quarantine location from where they could ensure continuity of government and key economic infrastructure. By making that quarantine location an underground bunker complex, we have an ideal setting for a Thing sequel. The characters are closed into a network of caves hundreds of meters below ground. They're dependent on electricity for light, which can be used as a plot device to trap characters in the dark in some scenes. The sense of confinement could be even worse than in the first film, because you can't run away or escape in a helicopter or a sled. And something else that could be thematically interesting would be to have the cave network symbolize the insides of a human body, implying that the characters are like cells or bacteria in a living bloodstream. Red emergency lighting like that used in Jim Cameron's Aliens, and carefully chosen props and set designs could give some scenes an unnerving, organic look. This worked more explicitly in the first Alien film, in which the alien vessel was made to look like the inside of a dead corpse.